Kyle Morrison wiped the sweat off his forehead as he floated through Outpost Zephyr-9's main airlock. He felt uneasy right away when he got there. There was only one light in the room, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the dust. The mining station had been empty for 15 years, floating through space like a ghost made of metal. As he walked down the first hallway, his boots made a hollow clanging sound. It was good that the gravity generators still worked. He didn't need to walk in zero gravity while carrying heavy equipment today. Kyle looked at his scanner and marked the spots where he needed to go get the valuable mining tools. Simple task. Get in, grab your things and leave. He needed the money and the company was paying him well for it. There were 3 days left to pay rent. The station didn't feel right though. Maybe it was the lack of noise. There was never this quiet on space stations. There was always the sound of air recyclers, electrical systems, or something else. But Zephyr-9 was mostly quiet except for the sound of his footsteps and breathing. Kyle tried to forget what happened here 15 years ago. An accident happened while mining. A lot of people died. The company had closed it off and let it drift. He first went through the crew quarters. Personal things are still all over the place. There are coffee cups on the tables. There are pictures on the walls. It was as if everyone had just disappeared in the middle of their day. Kyle shook off the bad feeling and got back to work. He had about 8 hours before the station moved into a radiation belt. There was nothing that could save it after that. Or him if he was still there. His scanner made a sudden beep. Kyle stopped and looked at the readout. That was strange. The scanner was picking up a sign of life. It's there but it's faint. Coming from below in the levels of the cargo bay. Kyle's first thought was that his scanner was broken. Nothing could live for 15 years on a deserted station. No food, not enough power, and freezing temperatures when the heat went out. It couldn't be done. But the scanner kept beeping, saying that something alive was down there. He should not pay attention to it. That was the right thing to do. He was supposed to get equipment, not look into strange life signs. But Kyle had never been very good at making the right choice. He had always been weak when it came to curiosity. What if someone really was down there? What if they needed help? He found the emergency ladder that led to the lower levels and began to climb down. He was scared with every step because the ladder was old and creaky. The temperature dropped a lot when he got to the cargo bay level. He breathed out little clouds. The heating down here had definitely stopped working years ago. The cargo bay was huge. There were shipping containers stacked everywhere and most of them were open and empty. Before leaving, the company took what they could and left the rest. Kyle's flashlight beam moved across the big room, searching for the source of the life signature. It said it was close on his scanner. Very near. After that, he saw it in the far corner. At first, his brain couldn't make sense of what he was seeing. It was too big and too hard to do. A dragon. A dragon that is real and alive. Kyle had seen dragons before in spaceport holding areas and on the news. People were most afraid of them because they were the most dangerous predators in the known galaxy. Strong, smart, and very dangerous. But this dragon was not like the others. Its scales were pure white and shone like polished marble even in the dark. Kyle had never seen a dragon that was white. He didn't even know they were real. Most dragons were dark, with blacks, deep reds, and browns. This one looked like it was made of ice. The dragon was completely still on the cold metal floor. It only moved its chest slowly up and down as it breathed. Kyle figured out that something was very wrong as he got closer. The dragon's body didn't move at all, but its eyes were open, pale blue, and following him. Not a single twitch. Kyle's heart raced as he took another careful step forward. The dragon made a low, quiet noise. It wasn't mean. It sounded a lot like a whimper. Like a call for help. He took out his medical scanner and pointed it at the creature with shaking hands. The results made him feel sick. The dragon couldn't move. Totally paralyzed from the neck down. It could see, hear, and feel, but it couldn't move. Stuck in its own body. Kyle saw that the dragon had a collar around its neck. It was old and worn out, but he could still read the name that was carved into the metal. Axios. The name of the dragon was that. He looked into those light blue eyes again and saw something that made him make up his mind. Smartness. Getting it. And begging that was full of despair and hopelessness. This wasn't just a pet. This was a person who was stuck and couldn't do anything, and they were going to die alone in the dark. Kyle didn't know how the dragon got here or why it couldn't move. But he was 100% sure of one thing. He couldn't leave this thing behind. Suddenly, the communicator on his belt started to crackle. His boss's voice came through, sounding far away and tinny. Update on Morrison's status. The radiation belt is moving faster than we thought it would. You have 6 hours now, not 8. Take what you can and get out of there fast. 6 hours. Kyle looked at Axios and then at his scanner, which showed that the dragon weighed 800 pounds. It would take him about an hour to get the mining tools to his shuttle. Getting an 800-pound dragon that can't move to his shuttle? That could take the whole 6 hours. Possibly more. And there was no way to know for sure that he would succeed. He could die too if he tried to save the dragon. It was clear what the smart choice was. Save himself. But Kyle ended up kneeling next to Axios instead and slowly reaching out with one hand. The dragon's eyes got a little bigger as they followed his movement. Was that hope Kyle saw? He gently touched the dragon's scaled face with his hand. The scales were smooth but cold. Kyle's heart broke a little when Axios made another soft sound. How long had this poor thing been lying here alone, unable to move or do anything? Days. Weeks. Longer? Kyle made up his mind. Might have been dumb. He might regret it. They might both die trying. But he couldn't live with himself if he left now. In his dreams he'd always see those pale blue eyes. Okay, Axios, Kyle said quietly, his voice steady even though he was scared. I don't know how we're going to do this, but I'm going to get you out of here. I swear. Just hold on a little longer. The dragon blinked slowly and Kyle could have sworn he saw thanks in those old eyes. He got up and looked around the cargo bay. His mind was already working on the problem. 800 pounds. 6 hours. There are several levels to climb. You have to squeeze through a narrow shuttle airlock. It shouldn't be possible. But Kyle had made a living by making things that seemed impossible work. He worked as a mechanic. He fixed things. And right now, the problem was saving a life that everyone else had given up on. He saw some cargo straps hanging on the wall and an old hover dolly that was made to move heavy things. It was the beginning. Not a great start, but a start. Kyle took the tools and went back to Axios. Okay, big guy, he said, trying to sound more sure of himself than he was. This is probably going to be hard, but we don't have much time left. Please believe me. Kyle felt something change between them when Axios looked into his eyes. A clear understanding. A link. The dragon was putting his life in his hands. Kyle had to keep his word. He started working. Kyle got down on one knee next to the huge white dragon and took out his medical scanner again. Before he tried to move Axios, he needed to know what he was dealing with. Kyle could barely understand the data that the scanner was showing as it worked. He wasn't a doctor, he was a mechanic. But he knew how to tell when something was wrong. The scanner showed that there was a neural implant in the back of Axios's head. Kyle's jaw tightened when he figured out what it was. He had seen these things before in the black market areas of spaceports. Smugglers used them to keep valuable animals in check. The implant sent signals that blocked nerve connections which stopped the brain from talking to the body. It was cruel technology that made living things weak and easy to move. Someone had done this to Axios on purpose. They probably paralyzed him on purpose so they could take him somewhere. Then something went wrong and the dragon was left here. Kyle's chest was full of anger. What kind of person would do this to a living thing? Again he looked at the collar around Axios's neck that had faded. The name was hard to read because it had faded with time. There was also other writing, though in smaller letters. Kyle moved closer with his flashlight. It was a code for shipping. A place to go. This dragon had been cargo, like a piece of equipment instead of a living thing. Axios paid close attention to Kyle's face. Those pale blue eyes seemed to know what Kyle was feeling at all times. The dragon made a small, soft sound that sounded like it was asking. Kyle understood that Axios was trying to help him in some way, even though he was the one who needed it. Kyle said softly, "Yeah, I'm fine," and put his hand on the dragon's shoulder. "Just angry at the people who hurt you. But we are going to fix it. Somehow." Another message came through on his communicator. Kyle checked it, but he didn't want to. There was no doubt that the radiation belt was speeding up. His boss sent him new calculations that showed he had less than 6 hours left. He might have gotten 5.5. The message ended with clear orders to leave right away with as much equipment as he could carry quickly. Kyle looked at the cargo straps in his hands, then at Axios and then back at his communicator which was counting down. It's been 5 hours and 23 minutes. He wasted a minute every time he thought about something. His logical mind laid out the facts in a cold way. Axios weighed 800 pounds. The dragon couldn't move himself at all. There were several levels at the station between here and the docking bay where Kyle's shuttle was parked. Some of those passages were small. Some had steps. The hover dolly would help, but it wasn't made to carry this much weight over long distances. And after he got Axios to the shuttle, he would have to figure out how to keep a dragon alive in flight with only basic life support systems made for people. There was only a 20% chance of success. Less likely. Kyle would die too if he failed, if they got stuck somewhere or if they ran out of time. The radiation would slowly and painfully kill both of them. He needs to go. Anyone with common sense would leave. His family needed the money he made. His sister was counting on him to help pay for her school. His mother's medical bills weren't going to pay themselves. What would happen to them if he died here? But when Kyle looked into Axios's eyes again, he saw something that made all of his logical arguments go away. The dragon was more than just scared. He was okay with it. Axios had already made peace with the fact that he would die alone here. He had probably been lying in this cargo bay for weeks or even months, losing hope little by little. And then Kyle showed up, and for a short time hope came back. But now Axios was looking at Kyle's face and seeing the doubt and fear there. Hope was dying again. Kyle knew that look. He had seen it on his father's face in the hospital right before he died. That time when someone gives up because they know no one is coming to help them. Kyle was 17 at the time, too young and weak to change anything. He had held his father's hand and watched him die, wishing he could do anything to help. He was no longer 17. He wasn't weak. And this time he could do something. Kyle said to himself, "Screw it," and made up his mind. He took the cargo straps and carefully wrapped them around Axios's body. "Hey buddy, we're both leaving this place. I didn't come all this way to leave you behind." Axios's eyes got a little bigger, and surprise replaced resignation. The dragon's chest made a soft rumbling sound. Kyle decided to take that as an agreement. He put the hover dolly next to Axios and turned it on. The device came to life with a hum, and its anti-gravity generators made it lift a little. But 800 pounds was still 800 pounds. Kyle had to use all of his strength to roll Axios onto the dolly platform. His muscles hurt a lot. Even though it was cold, he was sweating a lot. Kyle grunted, come on," as he pushed with his legs and back. He was able to get the dragon on the dolly, but it took him a long time and a lot of pain. Axios couldn't help. He couldn't move his weight or do anything else to help. He was dead weight, and Kyle could feel every ounce of it. Kyle tested the dolly's movement after securing Axios with several straps. It didn't respond quickly. The motors were having trouble with the load. This was going to be harder than he had planned. But he was now committed. There is no going back. He took hold of the dolly's handle and began to pull. The wheels didn't want to roll across the metal floor. Kyle had to stop and catch his breath every few feet. His arms hurt already, and they had only just begun. The trip from the cargo bay to his shuttle suddenly felt like it would take forever. "Sorry about the bumpy ride," Kyle said between breaths. This thing wasn't made to carry dragons. Axios made a small sound that could have meant understanding. Or maybe hurt. Kyle didn't know. He kept pulling one step at a time. They got to the ladder that went up to the main level. Kyle kept looking at it with more and more fear. The hover dolly couldn't go up ladders. He would have to find a different way to get up. There had to be a place with a cargo elevator. There were always heavy equipment lifts at these mining stations. He ran through the nearby hallways looking for Axios in a hurry. The clock kept ticking. 5 hours to go. Then it was 4 hours and 50 minutes. Every second counted now. Kyle finally found it. An old freight elevator that was big enough to hold mining tools. He pushed the call button and hoped it still worked. Nothing happened for a long, horrible time. Then the elevator creaked and shook as it slowly went down to his level. The doors creaked and squeaked as they opened. Kyle ran back to Axios and pulled the dolly toward the lift. It was hard to get through the doors. The dolly barely fit. But they got inside, and Kyle pushed the button for the main level. The elevator shook and made noise, but it started to go up. The elevator suddenly stopped halfway up. Kyle's heart raced. The emergency lights blinked. A beeping alarm went off. Everything around them at the station was falling apart. Kyle kept saying no as he pushed buttons. "Come on, work. Please do your job." The elevator stayed frozen for what seemed like hours, but it was probably only 30 seconds. Then it jerked back into motion and kept going up slowly. Kyle let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. When they got to the main level, Kyle quickly pulled the dolly out because he was afraid the elevator would break down completely. Now his arms felt like they were made of rubber. His whole body hurt. But they were getting closer to the shuttle. One step closer to getting away. Kyle turned the corner and his heart sank. The main hallway that led to the docking bay was blocked. A part of the ceiling had fallen in, making a wall of twisted metal and debris that completely blocked their way. There was no way to get through. No way out. They were stuck with less than 4.5 hours to go before the radiation hit. Kyle stared at the fallen corridor and felt his heart race. Metal beams that looked like broken bones blocked their way completely. Pieces of ceiling panels and ripped-up electrical wiring made a mess that was impossible to get through. He couldn't even see the other side. It would take hours of cutting and clearing to get through, and they didn't have that much time. They hardly had for now. In anger, he hit the wall with his fist. They were going to die anyway because of a stupid ceiling that fell down, no matter how much work and risk they put in. It wasn't right. Axios had already been through too much. The universe couldn't be this mean. Axios made a low rumbling sound behind him. Kyle turned around and saw the dragon watching him with calm eyes. Those pale blue eyes didn't show any blame or anger. Just accept it. Axios was ready to die alone by then. At least he wouldn't be alone anymore. That seemed to be enough for him. Kyle, on the other hand, wasn't happy. He wouldn't accept this. There had to be a different way. He told himself to think. Be like a mechanic. There is a way to fix every problem. You just have to look for it. He used his scanner to look at the layout of the station. The main hallway was blocked, but there were always other ways to get around. Service tunnels, emergency passages, and maintenance shafts. They were made for situations like this. Kyle zoomed in on the space between where they were and the docking bay. There. A maintenance shaft that runs next to the main corridor. It linked to the secondary docking bay on the other side. The shaft was narrow and not meant for moving cargo, but it was a way to get somewhere. Perhaps their only way. Kyle ran to the closest maintenance access panel and forced it open. The shaft beyond was dark and small. He shined his flashlight inside and his heart sank again. It was even smaller than he thought it would be. Not even wide enough for a person to fit through, let alone an 800-pound dragon. But what other option did they have? Stay here and die, or try the impossible and maybe die anyway? They had a chance at least by trying. Kyle went back to Axios and knelt down next to him. Okay, let's make a new plan. It's not a good plan, but it's the only one we have. There is a maintenance shaft that goes around this collapse. It's really tight, but I think we can get it to work. But it's going to be hard. Very hard. Axios blinked slowly. Kyle thought that meant he understood and maybe even agreed. The dragon couldn't talk or nod, but the way he looked at Kyle made it clear that he trusted him to do what needed to be done. Kyle took apart the hover dolly. It was too big for the shaft. Instead, he used the dolly's base and the cargo straps to make a makeshift sled. It took a long time, but when he was done, he had something he could pull behind him through small spaces. He made sure that Axios was as safe as possible on the sled. Kyle said, "This is going to hurt. Your scales are going to rub against metal. I'll go as slowly as I can, but time is running out." He tied one end of a cable to the front of the sled and the other end around his waist and shoulders. Then, on his hands and knees, Kyle squeezed into the maintenance shaft. As he crawled forward, the cable pulled tight behind him, pulling Axios along with him. Kyle winced when he heard Axios' scales scrape against the metal walls. He couldn't help but remember that he was hurting the dragon with every horrible grinding sound. Kyle's shoulders brushed against both sides of the shaft as he crawled through it. Axios barely fit behind him. The dragon's body pushed against the walls and squeezed through openings that were too small for him. Kyle pulled and crawled, then pulled and crawled again. The hard metal floor made his knees and hands go numb. Even through his clothes, the cable dug into his shoulders. Even though it was cold outside, sweat soaked through his shirt. He had to stop and catch his breath every few feet. His muscles were begging him to rest, but the clock in his head kept going. 3 hours and 40 minutes. 35 minutes and 3 hours. The shaft twisted and turned to fit the shape of the station. Kyle had to back up and change the angle of Axios sometimes to get it around corners. They got stuck twice and Kyle had to unhook the cable, go back and push the dragon from behind while pulling it from the front. It felt like his back was on fire. He couldn't see the rough metal edges in the dim light, so his hands were bleeding. Axios stayed quiet behind him, only making soft noises now and then. Kyle couldn't tell if the sounds were of pain or encouragement. Maybe both. Kyle kept talking to the dragon even though it was dark and he was tired. He wasn't sure if it helped Axios, but it helped him. "Almost there, buddy. Just a little bit more. We can do this. There's no turning back now." The station shook violently without warning. As alarms went off all over the building, Kyle froze. His scanner made a loud beep. The radiation belt had sped up even more. They had less than 3 hours left, and the hull of the station was starting to bend under the early radiation pressure. Come on, Kyle said quietly as he crawled faster even though he was tired. His body had gone past pain and was now in a kind of numb automatic mode. Pull your hand and knee forward. Pull with your hands and knees. Again and again. The shaft began sloping upward. Kyle hadn't expected that. Pulling Axios uphill was exponentially harder. The cable dug into his shoulders so hard he thought it might cut through to bone. His legs shook with every push upward. Twice his grip slipped and they slid backward, losing precious progress. Kyle wanted to cry. He wanted to scream. He wanted to give up. But Axios was depending on him. Nobody else was coming to help. It was just Kyle and his stubborn refusal to let another living being die when he could prevent it. He thought about his father again. About holding that hand in the hospital and feeling so helpless. About all the nights afterward when he wished he could have done something more, anything more. This was his chance to do more. This was his chance to save a life when it mattered most. That thought gave Kyle strength he didn't know he had. He pulled harder, climbed faster, ignored the pain completely. His vision narrowed to just the next foot of shaft, the next pull, the next moment. Nothing else existed except forward motion. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 40 minutes, Kyle saw light ahead. The end of the shaft. He wanted to laugh with relief but didn't have the energy. He pulled Axios the last few feet and emerged into the secondary docking bay. They'd made it. They were on the other side of the collapse. Kyle collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air. Every muscle in his body trembled. His hands left bloody smears on the metal deck. But they were through. They were actually through. He only allowed himself 30 seconds of rest. Then Kyle forced himself to stand and look around. His shuttle was parked in the smaller secondary docking bay, which was smaller than the main one. Earlier he had used this bay to load equipment. The shuttle sat there, looking like a beautiful metal angel of salvation. But Kyle's relief turned to worry when he looked at the bay's airlock systems. There were red warning lights flashing all over the place. The door to the airlock was broken because the station was falling apart. The seal was broken. It wouldn't stay in place in a vacuum. Kyle only had one spacesuit in his shuttle, so opening that door would have let the bay out into space. He looked at Axios, who was still tied to the sled. The dragon quietly watched him as if it knew they had run into another impossible problem. Kyle thought about all of his options. He could wear his spacesuit and live. But Axios would die right away in a vacuum. Dragons could live in a lot of different places but not in a hard vacuum. Unless Kyle did something very dumb and risky. He ran to his shuttle and grabbed all of his emergency supplies. Thermal blankets made to keep you warm in very cold weather. Emergency foam that hardened into a seal that kept air out. A small oxygen tank that can be carried around. Supplies for healthcare. All of it. Kyle worked quickly, wrapping Axios in layers of thermal blankets. He used all of the repair foam in the can to make a thick cocoon around the dragon's body. It wasn't a suit for space. It wouldn't keep you safe from a vacuum for long. But there is a chance that it would last long enough. Kyle said to Axios while he worked, "This is crazy. This is the most insane thing I've ever done. But it's all I have." He put the oxygen canister close to Axios' head, hoping it would give him a few minutes of air to breathe inside the cocoon. Kyle then opened the cargo bay doors of the shuttle and put on his own spacesuit. The next part needed perfect timing and a lot of luck. Kyle had to get Axios into the shuttle before the airlock broke down completely. He had a few minutes at most. Kyle used pure adrenaline and desperation to lift the front of the sled and start pulling it toward the shuttle. The ramp to the cargo bay was down. Only 50 feet. He could go 50 feet. Kyle didn't care that his body was hurting so much. After everything they had been through, 50 feet was nothing. 30 feet. 20 feet. The door to the airlock creaked behind them. 10 feet. The airlock didn't work. Kyle heard the explosive decompression begin. He grabbed Axios and pulled with all the strength he had. They fell together into the shuttle's cargo bay. Kyle hit the emergency close button, and the ramp slammed shut. They were in. They were really inside. Kyle grabbed Axios as quickly as his shaking hands would let him, then jumped into the pilot's seat. His fingers flew over the controls, starting launch sequences that usually took 5 minutes. In 30 seconds he did it. The station was falling apart all around them. Kyle saw parts of the hull peeling away through the windows. The whole thing bent and screamed like a dying animal. Kyle started the shuttle. The small ship shot out of the dying station with all its power. A huge fireball of radiation and debris blew up behind them at Outpost Zephyr-9. The shockwave hit the shuttle hard and made it spin. Kyle fought with the controls with all his might, using every trick he knew. He slowly and painfully stopped their spin. They were falling through space but they were still alive. He wanted to have a party. He wanted to check on Axios. But exhaustion finally won. Kyle's vision went dark around the edges as his body simply shut down from pure physical and mental exhaustion. His last thought before unconsciousness took him was that they'd done it. Against every odd, against all logic and reason, they'd actually done it. They'd escaped. Kyle's head hurt and his whole body felt like it had been hit by a truck. For a brief moment he forgot where he was. Then the memories came rushing back and he sat up quickly, even though his muscles hurt and he didn't want to. The shuttle. They had gotten away from the station. But were they okay? Kyle looked at the navigation console and felt sick to his stomach. The explosion had hurt their systems more than he had thought. There was no communication at all. The shockwave had destroyed the long-range transmitter. All navigation showed were error codes. They were floating through space with no way to call for help or know where they were going. But they were still alive. That was something. Kyle staggered to the cargo bay on shaky legs. Axios was still strapped down and still in the emergency foam cocoon and thermal blankets. Kyle's hands shook as he slowly started to take off the protective layers. Please let the dragon be okay. Please. Axios's pale blue eyes opened and focused on him as he took off the last blanket. Kyle felt so much relief that he almost laughed. The dragon had lived. Both of them had made it through against all odds. Kyle said softly, "Hey buddy," as he checked Axios for injuries. "We did it. We really did get out of there." There was a low rumbling noise from Axios. Kyle thought that meant yes. The dragon looked tired but not hurt. The temporary protection worked for just long enough. Kyle looked over the life support systems on his shuttle. 2 people breathing oxygen would only last about 18 hours. After that, they would slowly die of suffocation. Kyle's chest tightened with worry at the thought. They had made it through the station, but now they might die in space. He made himself focus on the problems that were right in front of him. Axios was still unable to move. The dragon had been through a lot of trauma, being wrapped in a cocoon and pulled through a hard vacuum. Kyle had to check to see if he could help with the paralysis. He sat down next to Axios's head with his tools and scanner. The dragon looked at him with its smart eyes as if it knew Kyle was trying to help. Kyle looked at the neural implant more closely than he had before. Before, he had been in too much of a hurry and only wanted to get them both out alive. Now he could really look at it. The implant was a bad piece of technology that was probably against the law in most systems. It sent electrical signals to stop the nerve pathways between Axios's brain and body. Kyle had worked on enough electrical systems in his life to know the basic idea. It was only signals and circuits. There was nothing magical about it. This meant that it could be fixed. The question was if a mechanic who worked on mining equipment could fix something that was stuck in a dragon's nervous system. Kyle had never been trained in medicine. He could make things worse with one wrong move, maybe even kill Axios. But if they did nothing, the dragon would stay paralyzed forever. That wasn't okay. Kyle took out his micro tools, the same small tools he used to fix circuit boards and sensor arrays. His hands were no longer shaking. When he was trying to solve a technical problem, nothing else mattered. This was just another broken system that needed to be fixed. He was able to do this. Kyle was carefully checking the implant's connections when something strange started to happen. He started to feel things that weren't his own. Nervousness. Hope. Fear. They brushed against his mind like whispers he couldn't quite hear but somehow understood. Kyle thought at first that he was just imagining it. The stress and tiredness were messing with his mind. But the feelings got stronger and clearer. He felt a sharp spike of pain when he touched a very sensitive part of the implant, which made him gasp. But his body was fine. He didn't feel the pain. It hurt Axios. Kyle was somehow feeling what the dragon was feeling. "Can you feel this?" Kyle asked in a low voice, not expecting an answer. Axios couldn't talk, couldn't move, and couldn't respond in any normal way. Kyle still felt the answer though. A wave of agreement of yes. It wasn't sounds or words. It was like knowing someone was looking at you from behind, even though you couldn't see them. Kyle's hands stopped working. This couldn't be done. People and dragons didn't feel the same way. They couldn't talk to each other with their minds. That was what all the science books said. But there he was, somehow linked to Axios's feelings. It could have been the stress. Maybe they had both been around too much radiation. Or maybe taking a dragon out of an exploding station while refusing to give up had made something that no one expected. Kyle had no idea. He just knew that the link was real. Kyle felt like Axios was supporting him through that connection, telling him to keep going and not be scared. The dragon had complete faith in him. Kyle was brave because he trusted. He turned his attention back to the implant and used his scanner to find the neural pathways that it was blocking. The design was actually easier than it seemed. The implant sent out constant interference signals that made it hard for the brain to tell the body what to do. The pathways were still there, but they were blocked. Like static messing up a radio station. What if Kyle could change the frequency? Change the implant so that it no longer sends interference and instead acts as a relay? That was a crazy thought. But everything about this was insane. Why stop now? Kyle used his tools to change the circuit pathways and make small changes to the implant settings. It took a lot of focus to make each change. He could hurt someone for good with one mistake or wrong connection. Kyle could feel Axios staying perfectly still because of their strange bond. He thought that not moving even a little bit would help. Minutes turned into an hour. Kyle's eyes hurt because he was concentrating so hard. His face was wet with sweat. His fingers hurt from holding the delicate tools still. But he kept working, making small changes one after the other. Kyle finally made what he hoped would be the last change. He changed the implant's main frequency generator so that it went from an interference pattern to a relay pattern. In theory, it should now let neural signals through instead of blocking them. In theory. Kyle held his breath and turned on the new settings. For a long time nothing happened. Then Axios's tail moved. Just the very tip, not much at all. But it was a move. Kyle laughed with happiness and relief. It worked. Oh my God, it really worked. Kyle could feel Axios's overwhelming emotion through their connection. Kyle was so happy, shocked, and thankful that he cried. The dragon had been stuck in his own body for a long time, but now he had hope again. Axios tried again, this time with a lot of focus. This time his whole tail moved and it lifted a little bit off the shuttle floor. Then one of the back legs moved. The movements were weak and not coordinated, like someone who had been sick for a long time and was just starting to walk again. But they were real. Kyle felt wetness on his cheeks and knew he was crying. He reached out and touched Axios's scaled face with his hand. Their connection made their feelings flow back and forth. Axios is thankful and relieved. Kyle's happiness and pride. Something deeper though that's harder to put into words. A bond forming between two people who had been through the worst and lived. Kyle said, "You're going to be okay," his voice full of emotion. "We are both." For a moment, Axios's eyes seemed to shine a little brighter. Kyle felt a strong wave of love and trust from the dragon that almost made him cry. They had only known each other for a short time, but they had already been through more than most people do in a lifetime. Kyle wanted to sit there and enjoy his victory, but his instincts as a pilot took over. He looked at the navigation systems again, hoping that maybe something had reset itself. Still nothing but mistakes. They were still lost in space and couldn't talk to anyone. The timer for the oxygen said there were still 16 hours left. Better than before, but not enough time to just float around and hope someone finds them. Kyle got back in the pilot's seat and tried everything he could think of to get any system to work. He changed the power supply, reset the circuits, and even tried hitting the console in the right places. Sometimes percussion maintenance really did work. Nothing worked. They were stuck for sure. Kyle felt the dragon's worry through his link to Axios. Not for himself, but for Kyle. Today, Axios had already accepted death once. He didn't want Kyle to die because of him, though. Kyle said firmly, "Don't even think that," as if he knew how the dragon felt. "We're all in this together now. We both get out or none of us do." He felt that Axios accepted that, along with something that felt almost like love. The dragon knew what loyalty was. He saw it in Kyle and was giving it back in the same way. Kyle was about to run one more test when the ship's sensors started to beep. There was something out there. Something big was coming toward them quickly. Kyle pulled up the sensor display and felt a surge of hope in his chest. A boat. A huge ship was getting closer to where they were. They were saved. Someone had heard their distress signal before the communications went down, or maybe they just got lucky. But as the ship got closer and Kyle's sensor readings got better, his hope turned to ice. The way the ship was set up didn't look like any Galactic Authority or commercial ship he knew of. The markings on the hull were from different operators. Worse than pirates or smugglers. And their weapon systems were on, aimed at Kyle's little shuttle. The person who was coming wasn't here to help them. Kyle felt the dragon's sudden surge of fear and recognition through his bond with Axios. Axios somehow knew that ship. Kyle's fear grew as the huge ship moved in to dock with them. He knew their ordeal wasn't over yet. It was just starting in some ways. They had gotten away from death twice today. Now they were going to have to deal with something that might be worse than death. Whatever was on that ship, it was going to get Axios. And Kyle didn't have any weapons, couldn't fight back or run away. He only had a dragon that was partly paralyzed and his own stubbornness. He just hoped that would be enough for whatever came next. The huge ship grabbed Kyle's shuttle with mechanical arms that hit the hull like iron fists. Kyle's heart raced as he watched through the screens. He couldn't do anything. His shuttle had no weapons and couldn't defend itself at all. It was made for salvage work, not fighting. Kyle felt waves of fear coming from the dragon through his bond with Axios. But not fear for himself. Axios was very scared for Kyle. The dragon knew who was coming and that they were dangerous. Kyle went to the cargo bay and stood between Axios and the door to the airlock. He was the only one who could get to the dragon. It was a pointless move. Kyle knew he couldn't stop armed professionals. but he had to give it a shot. The airlock made a hissing sound and opened. 6 people rushed in, moving like soldiers. They wore armor for battle and carried weapons that looked like they cost a lot of money to normal criminals. These pirates weren't just random. They were experts. Kyle slowly raised his hands, trying not to give them a reason to shoot. But he didn't leave Axios. The soldiers, mercenaries, or whatever they were quickly spread out and secured the shuttle. Their weapons were never aimed directly at Kyle, but they were ready. Kyle didn't understand what one of them said into a comm device. Then a 7th person came in through the airlock. His armor was more elaborate and he was taller than the others. His skin was covered in dark scales, and his eyes looked cold and reptilian. A Kreth. Kyle had seen their kind before at spaceports. People knew them for being ruthless in business and not caring about morals when it came to making money. This Kreth had a scar that went down the left side of his face in a jagged line. He looked at Kyle with mild surprise, then his eyes moved past him to Axios. He smiled with satisfaction. "A human," the Kreth said in perfect English, his voice sounding like gravel. "How strange. I am Vex and you are sitting with something that is mine." Kyle shot back before he could stop himself. "He doesn't belong to anyone. He's a person, not a thing." Vex laughed. The noise wasn't nice. The other Kreth soldiers laughed too, as if Kyle had said something funny. "That white dragon is worth more money than you'll see in 10 lifetimes, Vex said as he got closer. "His scales have genetic markers that are unique to him. Drug companies pay millions of dollars for just a few samples. Research labs will pay even more for a live specimen. 3 weeks ago he was being taken to a facility when he got away." Kyle's stomach hurt. He felt the dragon's memories flooding into him through his bond with Axios. Being caught. The pain of putting in the implant. He spent months in a cage that was too small for him. The crash that had left him at the station. Kyle's mind was flooded with all of it, and he had to fight to keep his face from showing how much it affected him. Vex went on as if he were talking about the weather. "The neural implant was a necessary precaution. Handling valuable cargo that can breathe fire is usually hard. The paralysis makes it easier to move them around. This one crashed because of a problem with the hyperspace jump, and we lost track of his signal. We've been looking for 3 weeks." Kyle's voice shook with anger as he said, "And you just left him there. You left him to die at that station. We thought he was dead already. It was planned that the station would be destroyed. But thanks to you he's alive and mostly well." Vex looked at Kyle with cold eyes. "You're just a worker for salvage, right? Not the right place, not the right time. I get that. So here's what comes next." Vex moved closer until he was only a few feet away from Kyle. "Now you walk away. Get on your shuttle, go about your life and forget you ever saw this dragon. We'll make it up to you for your trouble. 10,000 credits maybe? That's a lot of money for a day's work." Kyle made less than 10,000 credits in 3 months. It was enough to fix a lot of his problems. Pay off your debts. Assist his family. You might even want to get a better shuttle. You just had to walk away. Kyle turned to Axios. Kyle's eyes met the dragon's pale blue eyes, and through their connection he understood what Axios was trying to say. The dragon was letting him go free. Letting him know it was okay to leave. That he had already done more than anyone could have hoped for. Kyle shouldn't have to die for a dragon he didn't know well. Kyle also felt what Axios wasn't saying though. The dragon knew he was going back to that cage. Back to being picked like a crop. Back to pain in jail until his body gave out and he died alone. Kyle had been through too much pain in his life. His father was dying in a hospital. His mother had to work 3 jobs to feed the family. His sister gave up on her dreams because she never had enough money. He felt like he couldn't do anything about it, like he couldn't change anything that mattered. But this time was different. This time he was able to do something. He could get up and say no. No matter what it cost him. Kyle said quietly, "No deal. You're not taking him." Kyle saw something flash in Vex's eyes, but his face didn't change. Maybe a surprise. Or honor. "Are you really ready to die for a creature you just met today?" "I'm ready to die for doing the right thing." The Kreth soldiers moved their guns a little. Kyle's heart was racing, but he kept his voice steady. "You can kill me. That doesn't mean what you're doing is okay though. It doesn't make it less wrong." Vex looked at Kyle for a long time. "You are either very brave or very dumb. I haven't made up my mind yet." Kyle said, "Maybe both. But I'm not going anywhere." Kyle could feel the dragon's emotions changing through his bond with Axios. Thankfulness mixed with fear and hopelessness. Axios was trying to move and get strong enough to help. But his body was still too weak from being paralyzed for so long. Vex sighed as if Kyle was being unreasonable. "I really didn't want to kill you. Witnesses make paperwork more difficult. But I guess we have no choice if you insist on being a hero. He raised his gun and aimed it at Kyle's chest. Any last words? Kyle's mind was racing. He couldn't fight back. Could not run. The only thing he could do was stay between these monsters and Axios. At least he would die trying to save someone who needed it if he had to. He looked back at Axios one last time. I'm sorry I couldn't help you. Kyle could feel Axios' response through their bond. Not words, just feelings. The dragon didn't feel bad. He was thankful. Axios had met thousands of beings over the course of his long life. But Kyle was the first person who cared enough about him to give up everything for him. That meant something to me. It meant something even if it didn't end well. Vex's finger got tighter on the trigger. Kyle shut his eyes and waited for the end. Then Axios yelled. Kyle had never heard anything like it before. It wasn't just noisy. It shook his chest, bones, and soul. It shook the whole shuttle. Kyle's eyes flew open. Axios' pale blue eyes were glowing now, and bright white light was coming from them. The light spread over his scales, making the dragon a being of pure light. The Kreth soldiers fell back, covering their eyes. Kyle saw something on Vex's face that he never thought he would see on the face of a hardened criminal. Sheer terror. Vex whispered, "No. That's not possible. The old ones are no longer around. They're just stories." The white light got stronger and filled the whole cargo bay. Kyle felt a rush of power flowing through his bond with Axios, like electricity. But it didn't hurt. It felt warm, safe, and right. The light shielded both of them. The Kreth shot at them, but their guns didn't work. The light shield absorbed the energy blasts and they disappeared without hurting anything. Kyle was amazed to see Axios get up. He actually stood up on 4 legs, and his body moved with strength and grace that hadn't been there a few moments before. The neural implants sparked and broke, sending pieces to the floor. The dragon was free. Really free. Axios opened his wings, which were big, white, and beautiful. They filled the cargo bay, which made him look even bigger. The last light from his scales made everything look otherworldly. Kyle then heard Axios' voice for the first time. Not out loud but right in his head. Old and deep with a lot of power. "We are one now, Kyle Morrison. Connected by choice and giving up. And these animals will have to pay for what they did." The Kreth were backing up toward the airlock now, their weapons forgotten and their fear taking the place of their earlier confidence. Vex, who had seemed so sure of himself, looked like he wanted to run. Kyle stood next to Axios, and for the first time since this nightmare began, he didn't feel scared. No matter what happened next, they would deal with it together. Kyle was going to make sure that the dragon hunter never hurt anyone again because he had become the hunted. Kyle stood still, trying to figure out what was going on. The white light that came from Axios wasn't just bright. It felt like it was alive, with energy that made the air vibrate. Kyle could feel it moving through him, making him feel warm from the inside out. It didn't hurt or scare me. It felt safe, like being near a fire on a cold night. Kyle's mind was flooded with information because of their bond. Memories from the past that weren't his own. He saw flashes of dragon history that went back thousands of years. White dragons were the first of their kind. They were born with powers that other dragons didn't have. They could connect with other beings in ways that went beyond just being friends or loyal. These bonds were strong and deep, and they changed both creatures in ways that science couldn't fully explain. But these bonds were very rare. Most white dragons never found a being worthy of that connection in their whole lives. It took more than just liking someone to make the bond work. It required complete trust, true sacrifice, and the readiness to prioritize another's life over one's own. It couldn't be faked or forced. Both beings had to choose it freely with no promise of a reward. Kyle had done just that. He had put his life on the line for Axios many times without knowing anything about bonds or ancient powers. He did it because it was the right thing to do. He couldn't imagine leaving someone to die alone. That unselfish act had brought something out of Axios that had been asleep for a long time, maybe even his whole life. Their bond was now permanent and could never be broken. They were still two different people, but they were connected in ways that most people couldn't understand. Kyle could feel Axios in his mind like a second heartbeat, steady and calming. The Kreth soldiers were now pressed against the walls with their weapons down. They weren't hurt or unconscious. They were just held in place by Axios' energy. Kyle could see how scared they were. These were tough criminals who probably thought nothing scared them anymore. But now they were scared. Vex's face, which was covered in scars, was no longer proud. He looked at Axios with a mix of religious awe and pure fear. He stammered, "You're a bonded white dragon. The text said that your kind died out hundreds of years ago. Because of your power, you were hunted to extinction. Kyle felt like he was getting more information from Axios. People hunted white dragons just because they could make these connections. People who connected with them changed in ways that made them more than they were before. Stronger, better, and better in ways that made rulers and conquerors nervous. So, white dragons had been killed one by one, and their scales and bones were sold for a lot of money. Everyone thought they were gone. But Axios was still alive. Alone and hidden, he was probably the last of his family. And then the Kreth Syndicate caught him and turned him into something to sell. Kyle could feel anger rising in his chest. His anger and Axios's anger flowed together through their bond. These people had hurt a living thing. They had kept him in jail and paralyzed for months. And they had done it to hundreds of other animals for money as well. Axios got closer to the Kreth. His movements were smooth and strong, even though he had been paralyzed for a long time. Kyle thought there would be violence. Wouldn't it be normal for the dragon to want revenge after everything it had been through? But Kyle could feel Axios's restraint because they were close. The dragon was very angry, but he wasn't going to kill them. That wasn't him. I could end you all right now. Axios's voice rang in everyone's heads, and Kyle realized that the dragon was talking to everyone, not just him. I could get back at you for every second of pain and every day spent in darkness. But I don't want revenge. You tried to make me something I'm not. Kyle suddenly had a lot of respect for Axios. The dragon was able to control himself better than most people would have been able to in his situation. He chose mercy even when it would have been easy to be violent. Hey Kyle, Axios's mental voice said directly to him. Their ship has computers. Data. We need to get to them. Kyle nodded and he got it right away. If the Kreth had taken Axios, they probably took other people too. There could be proof, like shipping records or the places where other victims were found. They could reveal the whole operation. Kyle told Vex, I need to get into your ship's computer systems. Don't try to stop me. Vex didn't say anything. He just nodded weakly as if all of his confidence had left him. Kyle walked past the Kreth soldiers who were holding him and got on their ship through the docking connection. The ship was much bigger than his shuttle and was clearly made for long-distance travel. He found the computer's core and began to access the databases. What he found made him feel sick to his stomach. A list of dozens of captured creatures, like an inventory. There were dragons, phoenix birds, star whales, and even animals Kyle had never heard of. All of them are hard to find. They are all useful. The records showed that research facilities that didn't care about ethics or the law had placed orders. Video files showed animals in small cages being taken apart while they were still alive to get their biological parts. Kyle's hands shook as he looked through the information. There were more than one smuggling ring. It was a whole network that went across many star systems. The Kreth Syndicate worked all over the place, giving illegal research labs rare animals to use in experiments. Axios followed him into the computer room, being careful as they walked through the narrow halls. Kyle could feel the dragon's fear and sadness through their bond as it looked at the screens. All of these creatures were in pain just like Axios had been. Kyle said firmly, this has to stop. We need to put an end to them. Axios said, we can't do it by ourselves. We're just one person and one dragon against a group that has all the money it needs. Kyle thought long and hard. They needed help. Help that works. If the Galactic Authority had proof, they could shut down an operation like this. But would they trust Kyle? He was just a worker who salvaged things. And claims of dragon trafficking sounded like conspiracy theories that didn't have any proof. Unless they could show it beyond a doubt. Kyle began to download everything. Every file, every video, and every record of a transaction. He copied everything onto portable storage drives that were on the ship. If the right people got this evidence, it could bring down the whole Kreth Syndicate. Kyle said, we need to send this out. Send it out to every police department we can get to. Axios went to the ship's communication systems. Kyle felt like the dragon was sharing technical knowledge with him because of their bond. Kyle had never learned anything about alien computer systems before. Axios had been around for a long time and had learned a lot from many different places. Kyle was now able to get information through their connection. They were able to get to the Kreth ship's long-range transmitter by working together. It was strong and made to send messages over long distances. Kyle set it up to send their proof to every Galactic Authority frequency, every sector patrol station, and every major law enforcement network he could find. Kyle said loudly so the Kreth in his shuttle could hear, help is on the way. When they get here, you'll all have to answer for what you've done. Vex now looked at them with pure hate. You just declared war on the biggest crime group in this area. They'll follow you all over the galaxy. You both. You'll never have peace again. Axios bent down so that his huge head was close to Vex's face. The dragon's eyes shone with a white light. Let them give it a shot. Kyle felt their bond grow stronger and stronger. They were no longer just a mechanic and a dragon. They were partners in a bond. The galaxy hadn't seen anything like this in hundreds of years. They had already made it through impossible odds. They would deal with whatever came next together. But Kyle could feel something was wrong through the bond. A feeling of being drained, like water running out of a broken container. The glow from Axios' light flickered and faded. The dragon's legs shook. Axios? Kyle ran to his side. Kyle could feel it clearly now because of their bond. The power that had given Axios back his ability to move and made their bond was eating the dragon from the inside out. It was burning through him like fire through wood. The white light that had looked so pretty a moment ago was actually killing Axios. Kyle caught the dragon's head before it hit the floor when it fell. Axios had trouble breathing and his scales lost their shine. The pale blue eyes that had been so bright were getting darker. The bond, Axios' mental voice was weak now like a whisper. It needs to be balanced. I spent too much of my energy on you. I'm getting burned out. Kyle's heart felt like it was being broken. They had made it through everything. They had avoided death many times. And now the thing that had saved them was going to kill them. Kyle held Axios' head and said, "No, no, no. What should I do? How do I fix this?" Axios' eyes began to close. He started to breathe more slowly. "I don't know. Sorry, Kyle. I don't know how to stop it." Kyle felt like he was going to lose it. He couldn't lose Axios now that they had been through so much. He wouldn't take it. There had to be a way to help him. There had to be. Kyle held Axios' huge head in his lap and felt the dragon's life force fading through their bond. It was like watching a light slowly fade away, knowing you couldn't stop it. The last bits of Axios' energy kept the Kreth soldiers pinned against the walls, where they watched in silence. Vex had even stopped glaring and his face was hard to read. Kyle's thoughts were racing. There had to be something he could do. He didn't have to fight off smugglers and drag this dragon through an exploding station just to lose him now. Not like this. Not when they had finally found each other. Kyle begged, "Stay with me," his voice breaking. "Don't you dare give up. We've gone too far." Kyle felt Axios trying to respond and hold on as their bond faded. But the dragon's power was fading away like sand through fingers. His breathing was shallow and not regular. The beautiful white scales that had shone so brightly were now dull and dead. Kyle made himself think in a logical way. This was just another issue that needed to be fixed. If you knew how it worked, you could fix any broken system. There was an imbalance in the bond that was draining Axios. That meant Kyle had to figure out what caused the imbalance and how to fix it. He ran back to the Kreth ship's computer and frantically searched through their databases. The Syndicate traded in unusual animals. They need research data, biological information, or something else that could help. His fingers moved quickly over the controls, opening file after file. A lot of it was useless. Market prices, shipping routes, and how to harvest. No talk of bonds or white dragons. Kyle wanted to yell out of frustration. There wasn't much time left. Every second he spent looking was a second that Axios didn't have. He then found it. A document called Historical Analysis of Bonded Dragon Pairs is buried deep in an old research archive. Kyle opened it with hands that shook and began to read as quickly as he could. The document was old and written in a formal way that was hard to understand. But the main point was clear. Bonded pairs needed to be in balance. Both beings had to give and take energy in the same amount. It was supposed to move in a circle, always going back and forth between them. When one side gave too much, it made things dangerously unbalanced. Axios had given Kyle a huge boost in strength so that he could protect them both and get around again. But Kyle's body couldn't handle all that energy. He was like a sponge, soaking it all up and taking more from Axios without giving anything back. The bond had turned into a one-way drain instead of a fair trade. The paper talked about a process for stabilizing things. Both beings had to let go of all their mental barriers and let the energy flow freely between them. It took complete faith and perfect synchronization of consciousness. But there was a warning in big letters. Trying to stabilize too quickly could ruin both minds. For most bonded pairs, it took years to reach true balance. If you force it in a few minutes, it could hurt both of your minds or even kill you. Kyle didn't care about the dangers. He was not going to let Axios die. As long as the dragon lived, it didn't matter what happened to him. He ran back to the cargo bay and knelt down next to Axios. The dragon's eyes were barely open now, and his breathing was so weak Kyle could barely see his chest moving. Kyle felt Axios slipping away as their bond grew weaker. His mind was fading into darkness. "Listen to me," Kyle said urgently, putting both hands on Axios' scaly face. I can fix this. We just need to find a way to balance the flow of energy. Please help me with this. Axios's mental voice was almost a whisper. Too risky. It takes time to do the process. We could both die if we hurry. Kyle said firmly, then we die together. I'm not going to lose you. I won't stand by and watch someone else I care about slip away. Not again. Kyle's mind was filled with pictures of his father. Sitting in that hospital room, holding that weak hand and feeling completely helpless. At the time he was too young to do anything but watch. But he wasn't weak anymore. He had a chance to save someone, and no matter what it cost he was going to do it. Axios could feel Kyle's determination and pain from past losses through their bond. The dragon got it. He had lived a long time and traveled a lot in the galaxy, so he could tell when someone had been hurt by loss. Kyle wasn't just trying to help Axios. He was trying to avoid going through another terrible loss. Kyle said, "Tell me what to do. Please." Axios got as much strength as he could. Let go of everything. Fear, doubt, and the need to protect oneself are all walls that people put up to keep themselves safe. To trust me with all of who you are, you need to open your mind completely. Kyle shut his eyes and tried to calm down. But fear screamed in his head. What if he didn't make it? What if they both died because he didn't know what he was doing? What if he wasn't smart or strong enough to get this right? Trust, Axios said softly in his head. Believe in me like I believe in you. Kyle thought about why he had saved Axios in the first place. Not for any praise or reward. Not because it was smart or safe. He did it because he saw someone who needed help when he looked into those pale blue eyes. That was all. It was always enough. He thought about every moment that had passed since then. Pulling the dragon through a station that was falling apart while his body begged for rest. Putting thermal blankets around him and turning on radiation alarms. Not leaving him with armed smugglers even when it meant death. There was a simple and pure reason behind every choice. Kindness. The basic human desire to help those in need. Kyle let that feeling take over his whole body. He let down all the walls he had built to protect himself from years of pain and loss. All the walls that kept people away from each other. All the careful control he kept to keep from getting hurt. He let it all go and let Axios in completely. Axios did the same thing. Kyle never thought their minds could come together like this. He felt like Axios was everything. Centuries of memories even though Axios was still a young dragon. The pain of being different, of being born white when everyone else was dark. The sadness of being hunted and having to hide. The months of being paralyzed and hopeless. But also the strength, the old wisdom, and the strong will to live. Axios felt the same things Kyle did. The pain of losing his father too soon. The guilt of not being able to help his family because he didn't have enough money. The deep loneliness of someone who had learned to depend only on himself. But also the stubborn refusal to give up, the ability to feel great compassion, and the quiet courage that made him risk everything for people he didn't know. They could see everything about each other, even the broken parts and hidden strengths. And they took it all in without judging it. The energy between them found its natural way. It didn't drain from Axios to Kyle. Instead, it started to flow. Kyle could feel the dragon's power flowing into him, but now he was giving it back. His own life force, his willpower, and his stubbornness as a human being all came back to Axios. The circuit finished itself. The energy started to move in a never-ending circle between them, making each one stronger. Give and take back and forth perfectly balanced. Kyle could feel Axios's breathing get steadier and deeper. The dragon's scales got their color back. The pale blue eyes opened wide, clear and bright as if they had come back to life. The bond settled into place. It was no longer a desperate connection that could have destroyed them. It was something stable, permanent, and perfect. Kyle opened his eyes and saw Axios in a whole new way. The dragon was no longer just an animal he had saved. He was part of Axios and Axios was part of him. They were connected in a way that went beyond words or normal relationships. "We did it," Kyle said in a soft voice, full of awe and relief. "We did," Axios said, and his mental voice was strong again. "We are really connected now. Always linked, always different." Kyle felt Axios's deep gratitude and something else through their bond. Well, could be love but not the romantic kind. Something more profound and essential. The kind of bond that comes from seeing someone at their worst and best and still choosing them. Kyle smiled even though he felt tears running down his face. They really did it. They had stabilized the bond against all odds. Both were alive and whole, and together they were stronger than either could be alone. Suddenly, alarms went off on both ships before either of them could say anything else. Kyle looked at the sensors and saw that a lot of ships were coming up fast. Big ships with Galactic Authority markings that are used by the military. The signal for help had worked. Finally, help was on the way. The lead GA ship docked with them in less than an hour. Kyle saw heavily armed officers get on board, their guns ready for trouble. The Centaurian who was in charge was tall and scary-looking, with a stern face. The name tag on him said Commander Thrace. But instead of the relief Kyle expected, Thrace's face showed deep suspicion as he looked back and forth between Kyle and Axios. "Kyle Morrison," Thrace said in a cold voice. "You're being arrested because we think you're smuggling rare animals and working with known criminals. The dragon will be kept safe until the investigation is over." Kyle's stomach dropped. "What? No, you don't get it. We sent you proof. The criminal group is the Kreth Syndicate. We told on them. Evidence that could easily be made up," Thrace said. "We find you on a ship that is known for smuggling with a paralyzed albino dragon, which is one of the rarest creatures in the world. That makes you a top suspect. But they told the truth about everything. The Kreth told the truth. The word of criminals doesn't mean anything unless it's backed up." Thrace's face didn't change at all. "And this story about getting close to a dragon? Every xenobiology book says that is not possible from a biological point of view. Smugglers often make up long stories to avoid getting caught." Kyle tried to fight back, but GA officers surrounded him. Others came to Axios with special restraint gear made for dangerous animals. Kyle could feel the dragon's anger and frustration through their bond, but Axios didn't fight back. Things would only get worse if there was violence. Kyle begged, "Don't hurt him," as they pulled him away from Axios. "Please, you're making a big mistake." Kyle's last memory before they took him away was of Axios being put into a reinforced containment unit. Kyle could feel the dragon's steady determination through their bond when their eyes met across the distance. This wasn't the end. They would also find a way to get through this. They had made it through everything else together. They would somehow make it through justice too. Kyle sat in the cold room for what felt like hours. The restraints they put on him made his wrists hurt. The metal chair hurt his back and the bright lights above made his head hurt. Commander Thrace sat across from him and kept asking the same questions in different ways. "Tell me again how you got an albino dragon," Thrace said for what must have been the 20th time. Kyle took a deep breath and told his story again. Finding Axios on the deserted station. The paralysis. The escape. The Kreth hunters. Everything. But he could tell from Thrace's eyes that the commander didn't believe a word. "Dragons don't get along with people," Thrace said flatly. "This is what every scientific study says. The species are too different in terms of biology. There's no way what you're saying is true. Then how do you explain what you saw?" Kyle argued, his voice getting sharper because he was angry. "The energy. The link. Your own sensors picked it up. Energy signatures that could be made again with technology. You work as a mechanic. You know how to make convincing visual effects." Kyle wanted to yell. How could he show that something everyone thought was impossible was possible? The bond was real. He could still feel Axios in his head, even though he was several decks away in the containment cells. The dragon was always there like a warm blanket that made me feel safe. But Thrace couldn't feel that. Kyle was the only one who could. "What about the proof we sent you?" Kyle asked. "The Kreth database files show hundreds of creatures that have been caught. The videos of experiments that were against the law. That's all true." Thrace said, "We're checking the data. The Kreth Syndicate will be punished if it's real. But that doesn't mean you're not guilty. You might have taken the dragon from them. You could be a smuggler trying to get rid of your competitors." The questioning lasted for hours. Kyle tried his best to answer every question honestly, but nothing he said made a difference. Thrace had already made up her mind that Kyle was guilty. The commander was just looking for proof that that was the case. In the end, they put Kyle in a holding cell. It was small and empty with only a metal bed and a toilet. When he closed the door, it made a loud clang that made his chest feel tight. Kyle lay down on the bunk, closed his eyes and reached out to Axios through their bond. The dragon's presence was lessened by distance and the protection that the containment cells used, but Kyle could still feel him. Axios was calm and patient as he waited. The dragon sent Kyle waves of comfort through their connection, letting him know without words that everything would be fine. They just needed to wait. Kyle wanted to have the same faith as Axios. Things looked pretty bad from where he was sitting. They were locked up by the people who should have been helping them. People were saying that the evidence they had worked so hard to get was fake. Nobody thought their bond was real. Hours went by. Kyle tried to go to sleep but couldn't. He kept thinking about everything that had happened, trying to find a mistake he had made or a way he could have done things better. But he kept coming to the same conclusion. He would do it all over again. Even if it meant Kyle going to jail, saving Axios had been the right thing to do. Meanwhile, Axios stayed completely still in his containment unit, which was several decks away. The cell was made to hold dangerous animals. Walls that were stronger, energy barriers, and weapons aimed at him all the time. The guards were on edge as they watched him, thinking he was a monster that could attack at any moment. But Axios didn't make any threats. He just sat there with his pale blue eyes calm and patient. He sent Kyle steady waves of comfort and confidence through their bond. The dragon had been around for a long time. He had learned that sometimes the best thing to do when something was unfair was to wait and let the truth come out on its own. Something happened on the second day of Kyle's imprisonment. Commander Thrace got an important message from the Dragon Embassy. Kyle didn't know about it then. He only found out the details later. Kale, a Dragon ambassador, had asked for immediate transportation to the GA flagship. She was very old and well-respected because she had been an ambassador for more than 200 years. Dragons didn't often get directly involved in Galactic Authority business. When they did, it meant that something bad was going on. When she got there, Commander Thrace met Kale in the main hangar. Even the strict Centaurian respected the emerald-scaled dragon, whose eyes held hundreds of years of knowledge. Kale said, "I need to see the albino dragon in jail right away, without any niceties. This can't wait." Thrace personally led her to the containment area. The guard stepped back nervously as Kale walked up to Axios' cell. For a long time, the two dragons just stared at each other through the thick glass. Then Kale's eyes got big with shock and something that looked like respect. "Let him go now," Kale said with urgency. "And bring the person here too. Ambassador, with all due respect, I can't just let go of a suspected smuggler and a possibly dangerous creature," Thrace said. Kale turned to face him and her old eyes shone with power. "Commander, you are keeping one of the most important beings in the galaxy in a cage like a regular animal. You need to let him go right away or I will file a formal diplomatic protest that will end your career. Do I make myself clear?" There was no way to argue with the steel in her voice. Thrace thought for a moment before telling the guards to open the containment cell and get Kyle. Kyle was brought to the containment area in handcuffs and was confused about what was going on. Seeing Axios through the now open cell door made him feel better. The dragon was fine. Kyle felt Axios' steady presence confirming it through their bond. Kale was very interested in Kyle. "Go up to him," she said. Kyle walked forward with shaky legs. Axios got closer to him. Their bond was strong even though there was a barrier between them. Kyle put his hand on the glass, and Axios put his scaled face against it from the other side. Kale listened to this simple conversation and made a noise deep in her throat. "By the old stars. It's real. A real connection. Can you see it?" Kyle asked, his heart full of hope. "I can feel it. People who know what to look for can see the energy signature right away." Kale looked at Thrace. "Commander, I need to tell you something that not many people in this galaxy know." She motioned for the guards to take off Kyle's restraints, which they did but not without a fight. Then Kale spoke and her voice carried the weight of history. "Albino dragons are more than just a different color. We are the first line of dragons, the ones from which all others came. My people don't tell a lot of people about this because white dragons were hunted almost to extinction because of their special powers." Thrace paid more and more attention as time went on. Other GA officers had come together because of the strange situation. Kale went on, "The most important thing that white dragons can do is make real connections with other intelligent species. These bonds are permanent links that make both beings better. But these kinds of bonds are very rare. Both sides must be willing to make real sacrifices, have complete trust in each other, and show complete compassion. You can't make them or fake them. Both beings must freely choose the bond." She looked at Kyle with a kind of respect. This person saved Axios' life when he could have just walked away. He put his life on the line many times for someone he had just met. That selfless kindness brought Axios' ability to connect with others to life. "What you're seeing is something that hasn't happened in more than 500 years. Kale took out a data tablet and showed Thrace old texts with pictures of white dragons in them. "These are documents from my people's archives. The markings on Axios' wings are the same as those in our oldest stories. Commander, he is real. And the bond he has with Kyle Morrison is real." Thrace looked over the evidence and his stern face started to crack. "I've made a big mistake if what you're saying is true." Kale agreed, "You have. And about the Kreth Syndicate evidence, my people have checked it out on their own. The crimes that are on record are real and many. Kyle Morrison and Axios are not criminals. They are heroes because they brought to light one of the biggest illegal operations in this field." The word heroes seemed to hang in the air. Kyle didn't like it. He hadn't done anything brave. He had only done what he thought was right. Thrace was quiet for a long time, obviously having a hard time with what it meant. At last he nodded. Let them both go. Right away. And take all the charges off the records. The containment cell opened all the way. Axios stepped out carefully, moving with grace and control. Kyle ran up and put his hand on the dragon's shoulder. They felt relief and joy flow between them because of their bond. I'm sorry, Thrace said in a stiff voice. I should have looked into things more before making any guesses. You were brave in what you did and I respect you for it. Kyle was at a loss for words. He was still mad about being locked up and not being believed. But mostly he was just glad that the bad dream was over. Kale walked up to them with a warm look on her face. What are you going to do now? The Dragon Embassy would be happy to give you help and safety. We thank you. Kyle glanced at Axios. They didn't need to talk to each other because of their bond. They already had a plan for what to do. Kyle said, the Kreth Syndicate is more than one ship. Some creatures are still being held captive. Still in pain. Now we can't stop. That's a noble goal, Kale said. But also risky. You'll need help. Then help us, Kyle said plainly. Please give us what we need to finish this. Kale smiled, which looked strange on a dragon's face but somehow felt real. You will have it. The Dragon Embassy will send ships, gather information and protect diplomats. We'll tear down this evil operation piece by piece. Thrace moved forward. The Galactic Authority would also like to help. We'd like to offer you the job of Special Liaison for Interspecies Relations, Morrison. It's a new job but one that is clearly needed. You'd have the power and resources to keep this work going officially. Kyle looked at Axios, who sent a message of approval through their bond. Kyle said, I agree. But only if Axios is seen as my equal partner and not as a pet I have to take care of. Agreed, Thrace said right away. A month later, Kyle was on the observation deck of a Galactic Authority cruiser, watching transport ships take freed creatures to safe worlds. The view was so beautiful that it made his chest feel tight with emotion. Each ship stood for lives saved, people who had been stuck in cages and were now going home. Different colored dragons flew next to the transports, and their wings caught the light from a nearby star. Phoenix birds with feathers that looked like they were on fire rode in special pods that were made for their comfort, not to keep them in. Even a small family of star whales floated through space close by, their huge bodies moving with an impossible grace. In the last month, more than 300 animals had been set free. The Galactic Authority had raided 14 different Kreth Syndicate operations in 6 different sectors, using the proof that Kyle and Axios had given them. The leaders of the criminal network were either in jail or on the run, and the network was falling apart. They still had work to do, but they had dealt a big blow to the trade in living beings. Axios stood next to Kyle, his white scales shining in the light of the stars. They were happy with each other because of their bond. This was what they had fought for. At this moment, seeing the results of their hard work made everything worth it. Kyle said softly, it's hard to believe it's only been a month. It seems like a long time ago that I went to that station to look for salvage tools. Time is different when you're fighting for your life every day, Axios said, his mental voice warm with laughter. Kyle chuckled. That was true enough. There had been a lot of raids, rescues, and diplomatic meetings in the last month. Kyle had gone from being a simple mechanic who was worried about paying his rent to sitting in rooms with military leaders and ambassadors. It was like a dream. But the job had also been very rewarding in ways that his old job never was. It felt like every animal they freed, every smuggler they caught, and every facility they closed down mattered. Kyle was really changing things in the galaxy. His father would have been proud of him. Ambassador Kale walked over to them from the observation deck. The old Emerald Dragon had become a close friend and ally over the past few weeks. She had been very helpful in coordinating between the Dragon Embassy and the Galactic Authority, making things easier for Kyle, who didn't fully understand the political issues. Kale said, the Dragon Council has asked me to thank you. Today is a day to celebrate the renewed unity between species. Next week, they want both of you to go to a formal ceremony. Kyle didn't like it when people talked about ceremonies and celebrations. We were just doing what we had to do. We're not heroes. That's what makes you heroes, Kale said with a smile in her ancient eyes. Real heroes are those who do things without wanting to be praised. You saw people in pain and chose to stop it even though it would hurt you. Kyle thought that Axios was agreeing with Kale because of their bond. The dragon thought Kyle was being too humble. But Kyle had never liked getting attention or praise. He would rather do the work in peace. Commander Thrace was working with the sanctuary ships behind them. The stern Centaurian had turned into an unexpected ally after he first thought he was a threat. Once Thrace was sure that Kyle and Axios were real, he gave them all the help he could from the Galactic Authority. He had made everything possible with his help. A young dragon came up to Axios in a shy way. She was still very young, with bright blue scales that showed how young she was. Kyle knew who she was from the rescue 2 weeks ago. She had been found in a research lab, where they kept her in a cage so small that she couldn't even spread her wings. The rescue team was horrified by the state of things. "Excuse me," the young dragon said in a shaky voice. "Did a person really save you?" Axios lowered his huge head to her level and spoke softly. "Yes. Kyle put everything on the line to save me when he could have just walked away. He shows that all animals have courage and kindness." The young dragon stared at Kyle with big, curious eyes. "I didn't know people could be so nice. The people who worked there were so mean." Kyle got down on one knee so he could see her better. "Not all people are nice, just like not all dragons are nice. But the good people in any group will always fight for what's right. I promise there are more good ones than bad ones." The young dragon smiled, and her fear seemed to fade away. "Thanks for saving us. All of us." She ran off to join other freed younglings who were playing nearby. Their friendship and freedom were slowly helping them heal from what had happened to them. Kyle felt warm in his chest as he watched her leave. This is why they did it. For times like this, when fear turns into hope. Axios said, "You're good with younglings, through their bond." "I had a younger sister. I still do, in fact. But I haven't seen her in a while." Kyle felt bad. He hadn't talked to his family in weeks because he was so focused on this mission. They probably thought he was hurt or something. Axios gently told them, "You should call them. They have the right to know that you're safe and what you've done." Kyle agreed. He would. So, there was still too much work to do, but he would make time for his family. They'd understand. At least he hoped they would. A communication chime interrupted his thoughts. Thrace's voice came through the ship's systems. "Morrison, we've received a distress signal. Small transport ship near the Centauri border. They say they got away from a smuggling operation and need help right away." Kyle looked at Axios. Through their bond, he felt the dragon's instant readiness. They had done this so many times that it was starting to feel normal. Distress call, investigation, rescue if legitimate, arrest if it was a trap. The work never really ended. "We're on our way," Kyle replied. They headed toward the hangar bay where their ship waited. It was a sleek vessel provided by the Dragon Embassy, specifically designed for a bonded human-dragon pair. Kyle could drive from the cockpit, and Axios had a special area that fit his size. It had weapons for protection, medical supplies for rescues, and enough room for cargo to move freed creatures. Kyle called it Second Chance because it meant a second chance for everyone they helped. Kyle thought about how much his life had changed as they got ready to launch. Just over a month ago, he'd been a struggling salvage worker living paycheck to paycheck, wondering if he'd ever do anything meaningful with his life. He felt stuck in a cycle of just getting by. Now he was bonded to a legendary dragon. He was an employee of the Galactic Authority. He had purpose and meaning that went beyond just paying bills. Every day brought new problems, threats, and chances to make the galaxy a better place. It wasn't an easy life. Kyle had been shot at, threatened, and worn out more times than he could count. There were nights when he lay awake wondering if they were making any real difference or just putting temporary bandages on an endless problem. But then he would think about the smile of the young dragon, or the look of thanks in the eyes of a freed star whale, or how having Axios in his head made him feel like he had a piece of home wherever he went. Those moments made it all worthwhile. "Are you ready?" Axios asked as they settled into their positions on the ship. Kyle quickly went over the checks that needed to be done before the flight. Everything was green. He started the launch sequence and felt the ship's engines come to life below them. Kyle said, "Ready?" They took off from the hangar and sped toward their next mission. Kyle could see the sanctuary ships still bringing freed creatures to safety through the window. That was work they had done in the past, proof of what they had already done. But their future work was ahead of them. More people who needed help. More wrongs to fight against. More chances to show that kindness and bravery could change the galaxy. Kyle said, "You know, I was supposed to have a simple week." The stars around them turned into lines of light as they entered hyperspace. Get some tools from a station that isn't being used anymore. Simple task. Not hard at all. Kyle had learned that the noise Axios made was dragon laughter. "And instead you found me. Maybe the universe has a sense of humor. Or maybe it just knew we were meant to be together." Kyle knew that was true because of their connection. He needed a reason to live and a purpose. Axios needed someone who would see him as a person, not a product. They needed each other to become the people they were meant to be. Do you wish you hadn't done it? Axios wanted to know. Things were easier for you before. Kyle didn't even have to think about what to say. Not for a second. Being simple doesn't mean being good. Life is hard, dangerous, and tiring. But it does matter. We are important. Things we do are important. Kyle could feel Axios' deep love and agreement through their bond. They were close partners, like brothers in spirit if not in blood. They would face whatever the galaxy threw at them next together. It would take a few hours to get through hyperspace. Kyle leaned back in his seat and set the autopilot. The lights in hyperspace made patterns that were almost hypnotic when seen through the viewport. Hey Axios? Kyle said after a short pause. Yes, partner? Thanks for letting me help you that day. Thank you for trusting me when you didn't have to. Kyle felt the dragon's warmth and fun through their bond. Thanks for being someone I can trust. Thanks for showing me that there is still kindness in this galaxy. They flew through hyperspace to the Centauri border, where they would find whatever was waiting for them. Two unlikely partners who met in the dark of an empty station and decided to face the galaxy together. They showed that even the most unlikely beings could connect. That bravery could be found in the most unlikely places. One person's choice to do the right thing could set off a chain of events that changed everything. Kyle had only been a mechanic looking for parts to fix. He was now something else. Not because he had more power or status, but because he had a reason to live. He had learned that the most amazing things in life came from making the simplest choice, to help someone who needed it. That lesson had gone against all the laws of nature and made something the galaxy hadn't seen in hundreds of years. A connection. A partnership. A friendship that went beyond species and showed what could happen when love won over fear. The galaxy would never be the same again. Kyle Morrison, the mechanic who had brought a paralyzed dragon out of the dark and into the light, would not either.